good evening to everyone. I see some familiar names from the past weeks, and if it's your first time joining us in this training, welcome. And if you're watching this at a later time, welcome, welcome. So as Cindy said, my name is Sofia Cervantes, and I'm with the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. We are a state advocacy agency, and so our role is to provide advocacy support to individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities and to support the systems and the families who support individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Our role is local in terms of answering questions for people, conducting trainings such as the one you're attending today on a range of topics. This is only one of a few of the trainings that we offer on regional center, on community services, on how to develop groups, how to give public testimony. So the list kind of goes on. This is one of the topics we present on. And then thirdly, our role is to advocate for systemic change. And when we say systemic change, meaning making changes to laws, policies, practices that systems may have, and advocating for change in order for there to be better quality of services provided to individuals and or for the system to work better for the community. And so if you have any questions, as of today, we are a resource to you. If we've never spoken before, good to meet you, and feel free to reach out to our office. Our state, we have 12 regional offices. We are one of them, and we serve Los Angeles County. If you want to contact the office in your area, feel free to contact us. We'll direct you to our website, connect you with the person in your area, and you can contact them as well. But so feel free to contact me at a later time. So today we're going to be doing part 3. This is our last Thursday together, at least in English. We will be actually doing this again. We're going to have a week break, and then we begin again with a 3-part series, the same series in Spanish. And so if you're bilingual, if you want to listen to the interpretation of the Spanish training, please feel free to join us. Okay, so today is our 3rd session. 2 weeks ago, we began strategies or IEP strategies part 1. Last week, we did IEP strategies part 2. And today we will be focusing on evaluations, how to understand them, and how to get the services that you need. Okay, so before we begin, I'd like to let you know that either, I think Cindy or Antonio, they're going to be dropping a link on the chat if they haven't already. And what you will see, let me know if you all can see my screen. It's a Google Drive that you guys could see, if I'm correct. Yeah? Yes. So, perfect. Thank you, Antonio. When you guys click the link, you'll see a Google Drive that looks something like this. So you could choose the language of choice. I'll press English. You'll then see a folder that says IEP Part 1 and 2. And then understanding evaluations. Under these 2 folders, you'll be able to see the presentation with a little star and then related resources. And obviously today, under understanding evaluations, you will be able to see the materials that we'll be using today, including the presentation that I will shortly place on the screen. Okay, so know that with this link, you'll have access to all the materials for not just this presentation, but for the whole series, part 1, 2, and 3, and the resources in Spanish as well. All right. Okay. And now you should be seeing my screen with the actual PowerPoint. Is that right? You guys can see the PowerPoint?
No, we're still on the Google
Okay.
Drive. Yeah.
Perfect. Let me stop sharing and share again. Nothing worse than when a presenter is talking, right? And they're like, as you see on your screen, and you're not seeing that on your screen. So there you go. Thank you very much. All right. And now you can see the presentation, I'm assuming. Okay, perfect. As we go into the presentation, know that the chat is available. If you have questions, please feel free to write on the chat. I know that sometimes it's, you'll forget your questions. So please feel free to write it on the chat. I will do my best to keep an eye on it. And so that I can answer questions as we go. All right. On this first screen, you see my information. You see the phone number and email. So again, please do feel free to contact me outside of this presentation if you have any questions. Again, on IEPs or special education and or any other matter related to disabilities. All right. Okay. So just kind of a brief recap. The past 2 weeks, we've been discussing strategies for IEPs, okay? And we've talked about the different ways that you may be able to resolve problems or issues with the school, okay? And we've identified that IEP meetings are really reserved for moments or occasions when your son or daughter requires a new service, or when there needs to be a change to the services on the IEP. We talked that in order for you to be able to have on paper what your son's or daughter's needs are, that it is really a good idea to consider writing a parent report. Listed, there could be headings, communication, and then you put bullet points about all the needs that your son or daughter has related to those areas. And then do the following: behavior, communication, behavior, social skills, comprehension, reading, whatever their areas of challenge may be, that you can do a parent report indicating these areas of need. Okay. We discussed how in an IEP meeting to get services, it is really a deficit-driven process, right? The IEP team needs to know what your son or daughter cannot do. And so today, and again, if you did not attend last week's presentation or the previous one, please do feel free. Maybe Cindy and Antonio later on will put the links of the YouTube videos where you could go back and watch part 1 and part 2. Okay, again, being that today we're going to focus on part 3, which is evaluations. Okay, and great. Someone had a question about that. I'm sure that the organizers will soon put the links to part 1 and part 2. All right, so today focusing on evaluations. Last week we talked a little bit about the importance, why it's so important for you to have access to evaluation reports prior to the meeting, prior to the IEP meeting, and why it's so important for us to understand what the evaluation says. Okay, as you see on the screen, this is sort of the structure of the IEP, right? It begins with evaluations. It then has what are called PLOPs, present levels of performance. We then have goals and objectives, accommodations and modifications, services, and placement, right? So if we notice, evaluations are at the top, which means the evaluations are what give us the present levels of performance, right? It lets us know where is your son in that specific area that they're evaluating, okay? And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Those present levels of performance allow us to create goals and objectives, appropriate goals and objectives. And if you remember from our previous conversation last week, SMART goals, right? The acronym SMART, okay? So goals and objectives are developed based on PLOPs. And again, SMART goals, all that, you could look at it in last week's video. Goals and objectives are developed based on the present levels of performance, and the evaluations also help us and gives us information on what accommodations and modifications your child may need, okay? We talked about the difference between accommodations and modifications. Accommodations are changing how the student learns. Modifications are changing what the student learns, right? So accommodations can be something like, my son is going to read the same book that all of his peers are reading, but an accommodation would be, my son is going to have a larger print, okay? Or it's going to have added pictures or diagrams, but it's the same book that everyone else is reading. That's an accommodation. A modification is if my son is reading a completely different book, the curriculum, what they are learning has changed. That is a modification. Evaluations, also very important, help us determine services, right? We need evaluations to tell us where are our child's needs, and based on those needs, services are developed, okay? And placement, okay? Evaluations demonstrate what our son needs, what our daughter needs, and therefore what placement will be the most appropriate. Will it be a special day class? Will it be an autism focused class? Will it be mainstream, special education class, etc.? So the evaluation, as you can see, there's a lot weighing on the evaluation. You want to make sure that you have them, and you want to make sure that you understand what the evaluation says. Because if you can understand what the evaluation is telling you, then you're probably going to be more prepared for what the school is going to tell you that they can do for you and cannot do for you. So one of the things that we talked about that is very important for you to know is, one, remember that we said, and if there's anyone that was here last week, feel free to answer on the chat or open up your mic, but the school is required to do evaluations. How often? A little quiz, little pop quiz. Anyone remember? And every
2 years?
Very close, every 3 years.
Every 3 years.
Okay, they are required to do it every 3 years. Because of this, sometimes you'll see that they call it the triennial, right? Every 3 years, they do evaluations, and then they have an IEP based on those evaluations. So the law requires the school to do evaluations every 3, but you have the right to request them every year. Okay, so the school isn't going to offer it every year. They're not going to go looking for you and saying, hey, would you like your yearly evaluation that you're entitled to? They probably won't do that. They'll come looking for you when it's time for you to do the triennial, right? The 3 years. But you have the right to do the evaluation or to request an evaluation every year. Okay, for some families, they say, absolutely, I want it every year. Why? Because of what we just looked at, right? If evaluations really are what allow for all these things, right? They give us present levels. They allow us to make appropriate and smart goals. They let me know what accommodations are needed, services. Some families may say, right, we need to do it every year. Other families may want to do every 2 years. And other families are okay with doing it every 3 years. You don't have to do it every year, but know that it is your right, okay? So it is your right to request evaluations annually, okay? We talked about the fact that evaluations, and we'll get into this just a little bit, evaluations can be done on areas of disability or suspected disability. So meaning if there's an area that you're noticing some changes and you're not sure that there's a problem in this area, but there is suspicion, right? There is suspected disability, you can request an evaluation in that area, okay? And again, you can request evaluations every year. We talked about this last week. It's very important for you to request evaluations, and anything that you do, requested in writing. And when we say in writing, we don't necessarily mean email. And we reviewed this last week. And the reason for that is you have proof that you sent an email. However, if they never reply to you, you don't have proof that they received your email. And when you are requesting things that have a legal time frame, you really want to make sure that you have evidence that they received your document, your request. So we always suggest that you do things in writing and that you ensure that it was delivered and that it was received by them. So to do that, you could, one, either take the letter in person and have a copy so that they can sign it and stamp it with the date, okay? Or you can send it by registered mail. Registered or certified. I believe registered is a little bit cheaper. although both of them have kind of gone up in price, but registered, I believe, might be a little cheaper. So you want to make sure. And why is that? We're going to get into timeframes right now, so I won't give you the timelines right now, but the school has specific timelines by which they have to reply to you when you request an evaluation. If you don't have proof of the date that you sent it and that they received it, you kind of don't have proof of when the clock started ticking for them, right? So if you requested an evaluation and they've taken 3 months, right? You have the right to do a complaint if they violated the legal time frame. But if you have no evidence of when you requested it and how long it's been since you requested it and that they haven't done it yet, then it's going to be a little harder to even do the complaint, right? Because there's no proof that you had asked the school. So it's always in your best interest to do it in writing. They often say, right, if it's not in writing, if it's not in black and white, it's like it never happened. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have it in writing. Okay, and again, must be done every 3 years. And it's important for you to know every time that an evaluation is done, there are legal requirements that have to be kept. There are legal requirements that the school is required to follow. So I want to direct you, pardon my lowering my screen. There we go. You all can see the Google Drive. Am I near a Google?
Yes.
Yes, okay, perfect. So if you click right here on legally required elements for LEA evaluations, if you click on that, we're not going to go through all of them, okay? But look at all of these requirements. All of these are required by the school. Right here, you have the legal citation of where you could find all of these requirements, okay? So amongst those requirements, we see what we recently discussed. It occurs at least every 3 years. It occurs before a change in eligibility. We'll talk about that in a bit. Has parental consent or took reasonable measures to obtain it, meaning the school had to have obtained parental consent for the evaluation, okay? Or have taken reasonable measures to obtain that consent. The learning agency has to provide notice of evaluation procedures. They have to use a variety of tools, et cetera, et cetera. In your own time, you can review all of these legal requirements. And these are important for you to know because this will help you determine whether the school has indeed violated the law, violated a legal requirement or not. Okay, so again, know that this tool right here, this list is under your Google Drive, under your English folder, under the folder Understanding Evaluations, and it is your second document listed. Okay, so there are several things that the school has to do and to ensure because they are indeed legal requirements. Okay, again, just to confirm, you guys are now seeing the PowerPoint again. Is that correct?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you very much. So now we get into evaluations, right? In terms of when are evaluations sought? Okay, when do you look for evaluations? Evaluations, the very first evaluation is often, thank you, and if the Google Drive link could be placed on the chat. I actually see that it was just posted and I just posted it again. Someone asked and it's on the chat now. Okay, so reasons for requesting an evaluation, typically when students or when parents start noticing, you know, my son's not really getting the information, they're not really finishing their work, I think something might be, you know, there might be a disability or whatever it may be, right? Usually that's when parents request an evaluation. That evaluation is done for the purposes of diagnosing and or looking to see if they are indeed eligible for special education. Okay, so there are evaluations that are to identify the area of diagnosis and to determine whether a person indeed is eligible for special education or not. And then after that initial one is done, then the ones that are to follow are usually to explore progress. Is the person making progress? Where do they fall in their skills, in their performance? Okay. So diagnostic evaluations are usually, again, the first ones that are conducted when you have suspicion that something is probably hindering your son or daughter from their academic achievement. Okay, and then the other ones can be done every year or every 3 years based on what you'd like, to be able to know where they are currently and how they're making progress, if they're making progress. Okay. If they're making progress, then you may argue, right, that they need the same level of service that they've been receiving. If they're not making progress, one might argue that they may need more services, right? They may need more supports in order to make progress in their academic achievement. Okay. So evaluations should inform decisions about the following things. Okay. Services and placement. The evaluations, remember this slide that we looked at, right? This is the structure of the IEP, right? Evaluations, and everything sort of trickles down from the evaluations, including services and placement. Okay, services is what supports and what services do they need, and placement is what environment will they learn in best, and what will be the least restrictive environment for your son or daughter to learn in. Okay, it's important to know when we talk about services, evaluations should let us know, give us some insight about frequency, quantity, duration, method, and type. So frequency would be how often, right? How often are we going to have that? Quantity is it 2 times a week, 3 times a week, right? The frequency and the quantity, how much, and duration, how many minutes will they give them? How long will the session be? Okay, so evaluation should be informing you how frequently does the service need to be provided, and what's the quantity and duration. Okay, so quantity is 20 minutes, 30 minutes a week, and then duration. Usually the duration is for the year, right? The IEP is usually done for 1 year. Then the method and type. Is it speech? Is it OT, occupational therapy? Is it adaptive PE? Is it a one-on-one that they need, etc.? Okay, is it transportation? Is it a behavioral interventionist? What service, what type is it? Then there's sometimes method. Your child can have communication or speech and language therapy, that would be the type. And the method, you might say, or the IEP team might discuss, will the method be one-on-one speech and language therapy, or will it be group therapy, right? Sometimes they do speech and language services in a group setting. So when we talk about method, that may be something to consider, right? Sort of how, we already know what type of service, now how, what methodology will be used to teach this type of service. And then again, how often, what's the quantity, and what's the duration, for how long will this service be provided. Okay, and then again, placement. Now, I do want to make a note here about something that I think is quite important. It is important for you to look at your IEP, right, and see how is the frequency, quantity, and duration stated on your IEP. And this is what I mean by that. So some individuals or some IEPs, on their IEP, it says the student will receive 1,000 minutes. I'm making these numbers up, right? But the services may say they will have 1,000 minutes a year. Okay. Some IEPs say the student will have 20 minutes weekly. Okay. Others might say the student will have 80 minutes per month, right? So some IEPs write it per week, per month, or per year. You may want to consider, if you think this is true, that most of our children need repetition and they need consistency in order to develop a skill throughout time. And the reason I say this is if your IEP says that your son will receive 1,000 minutes within the whole year, notice that technically what that means is if your son doesn't receive speech and language for 4 months, the school has technically not violated the IEP because the IEP says they will have 1,000 minutes in the whole year. So what's to say that the school might provide the 1,000 minutes, but the last 3 months, they may really jam them all in there, the last 3 months of the school year, versus giving them little by little throughout the year. So I don't know if you agree, but for most children, what happens, right, when they stop receiving a service? They kind of lose the skill. We even see that during the summer, right? They kind of had all this information, but then they had a break and it kind of fell out, right? So it takes a while to regain the skill. So for most children, it seems like the most appropriate thing that the services are given weekly, and therefore you may request that that's how it be written in your IEP. Because again, if it is not written on your IEP that it must be done weekly or monthly, let's say it says it yearly, then technically if they don't provide your son or daughter with services for 3 months, they're technically not in violation because they have the whole year to provide those 1,000 minutes, right? Does that make sense? Hopefully that does, right? So one thing for you to consider is look back on your IEP and explore whether that is a change that needs to be made within your IEP. Do I need to make sure that the way that the services are phrased on the IEP are per week or per month? If it's yearly, it may not be of benefit. You can decide this. You may think it's not a big deal, but if you do, then you may request that the IEP be written in that format, right? Identify minutes per month or per week, even better, okay? If then the school has 10 weeks that they have not provided services or 2 months, then you absolutely can make a state compliance complaint. We talked about this in part 1. You can do a state compliance complaint because they are in violation of the IEP. If your IEP says that the student should have been receiving 20 minutes every week and 16 weeks have gone by and they've received 0 services, then they are out of compliance with the IEP. Again, versus if it says they have a year to provide 1,000 minutes, technically they're not in violation because the IEP says 1 year. Okay, hope that makes sense. And you can consider whether that's something for you to look at in future. Okay. Evaluation results, again, should inform decisions about, we already said, services, placement, other treatments that may be appropriate, methodologies, okay, what kind of intervention is needed for your son or daughter, diagnosis, and severity, okay? If your son or daughter has a need, how severe is that need? That will help us oftentimes determine placement, determine if you've heard of classes. They're either mild to moderate or moderate to severe. Evaluation results should really give us some insight, give us information to make decisions about the severity, and therefore that may inform services and placement that your son or daughter needs. Okay. Now, when we talk about severity, maybe if you came last week, you may be thinking about this bell curve that we studied last week. Okay. Remember that last week, and I'll kind of explain this a little bit more again. We talked about this bell curve, which, let's forget about special education for a second. We said that this bell curve informs us about things like, again, forgetting about special education, like we talked about the height of women, okay? And we said most women, if I remember correctly, we said most women are 5'3" to about 5'5", 5'6", which is why this bell curve is the widest, right? The majority of people, the majority of women, sorry, their height is between 5'3" and 5'6", okay? So this bell curve tells us, yep, the majority of people fall within this average range. We then talked about the fact that in terms of height, there are those women that are above 5'6", okay? So these are your athletes, right? Maybe they're 5'7" to 6'3". That's pretty tall, especially for a woman, okay? So you notice how the curve, it's still a little bit thick, but it's dwindling down because most of us, most women measure within this average range, but indeed, there are some women that are taller than that. Then there are women that are superior to that height. They are from 6'5" to 7'2", let's say, right? The height could keep going on and on. This may be women who have a condition of, and pardon me, I think I have this this term more known in English than, or in Spanish than English, but in the category of giants, right? There's a condition that there are women and men too that are under a category identified as giants, okay? They are extremely tall. They are outside. We can call them in statistics, they're outliers. There's not too many of them. Look at the curve, right? It starts getting very small here at the bottom, right? Where you see that 2%, it's very small, but indeed there are some. If we go to the opposite side of the bell curve, we recognize this is the average of height of women, but then we have women that are below average, okay? They measure lower than 5'3" feet. I made the comment of that's kind of where my mommy is, right? My mom's a little bit on the shorter side. I'm within the average, I'm 5'5", right? My mom is a little below, don't tell her I told you. But she's like 5'3", maybe, if that. So there are women that are between, let's say, 5'3" and 4'11". That's on the shorter side, right? That we would identify that as below average. Then there are women who are on this deficient category. That's labeled deficient. Why? Because they are shorter than the than the other population, right? Than the rest of women. Okay, so these women may be under the condition of dwarfism. Okay, so there isn't a lot of women that are of this height, but there are some. Okay, so we talked about that last week. Then we related it to special education. Okay, so in special education, anytime that you do an evaluation, it is indeed to find out where does my son or daughter lie within this bell curve. Are the results do the results indicate that they are within the average? Or do the results indicate that they are actually above or superior to the average? Or do they demonstrate that they are below average in their skill, or are they on the deficient category? I see some questions coming in. Let me address those really quickly before we move on. What are the consequences of the school not being in compliance? Great question. Last week, we talked a little bit about how the law is kind of like the traffic signs that we have on the streets, the stop signs, I always think of this word more in Spanish, semáforo, the lights, right? Is it green? Is it yellow? Is it red? The law says you've got to stop when there's a stop sign. The law says when the light is red, you must stop. When it's yellow, you must slow down, not speed up, right? And when it's green, you can go, right? Now, what happens? Does that mean everyone always follows the traffic laws? No. What happens to those that violate that law? There's some that if there's a cop around and the cop sees their violation, then you hear the woo, right? And you get stopped and you usually get a ticket, right? But there are many, I was about to say many of us, I've never broken the law. Just kidding. I mean, well, I try to drive my best, but right, there are maybe some of us in this Zoom room that we might say, oh yeah, man, I passed the red light, or I didn't even see that stop sign, or I kind of broke the carpool lane and, but oh, thankfully no one saw me, right? I make this example because when we ask, what are the consequences of the school not being in compliance? The truth is, partially it's up to you. When the school is in violation, you have the right to make a complaint. And again, that's called a state compliance complaint. In part 1, we talk more about that. If the school is in violation, but the parent does not report it, then technically on paper, the Department of Education is looking at their districts and saying, well, they're doing fantastic. There's no tickets, right? There's no complaints. There's no state compliance complaints. Everyone must be happy. So the truth is, if they're in violation, if they're out of compliance, you can make a complaint. Now, what is the result of that complaint? In the state compliance complaint, there's an area for you to identify the problem and then what resolution you're suggesting. Usually that resolution is attached to, well, start giving them the service or stop violating the IEP, whatever the violation may be. Sometimes the department, if they see consistent complaints about the same thing, they may come in and put them on some sort of kind of compliance plan that they have to do this, or they have to now send reports of every IEP that has been requested and within how many days they did it, things like that. So the California Department of Education may put them on certain compliance plans, if you would, to get them in line. But again, so a slap on the hand, someone's asking, sure. And for you, so there's two ways to look at it, kind of systemically, what happens in the system, but what happens for you. If you have complaints, right, and you demonstrate, look at all these complaints and violations, and you at some point go to a due process, and we talked about this in part 1, a due process is a legal process that you would be taking the school to a due process in order to solve a disagreement. So a hearing judge would listen to the disagreement and either rule in your favor or rule in the school's favor. So on a personal level, how can doing complaints help you? They become your proof. Okay, technically we have the burden of proof. Yes, the person commented on the chat, absolutely. If you request the due process, you have the burden of proof. If the school takes you to due process, they have the burden of proof. So if you initiate a due process because you're finally fed up and they're not giving you what you need, and you go to a due process and you meet with a lawyer, because for a due process, you need representation from a special education lawyer, right? If you meet with a lawyer and you have in hand all these complaints, right? And you demonstrate, look at all these violations, in the long run, on a personal level, that may be very much in your favor. Because with all these complaints, you're able to show the judge, look at all these violations that they've done, right? They either haven't complied with or implemented the IEP, or they've violated my rights, or they've violated the law, right? Typically, a judge is going to be on the school side, period. But with these complaints and with your things in writing, that can serve you to demonstrate and introduce doubt against the school. Because you're saying, look at all this proof that I have. Look at all these complaints that I've done in the past 2 years. A due process, remember, you can go to due process for things within 2 years. So the state compliance complaints can help you on a personal level, okay, if you decide to go to a due process. Now, doing complaints on a systemic level may be of benefit if all parents whose rights are violated and whose IEPs are not being implemented truly do compliance complaints. I'm not going to say it's going to be magical and everything's going to be solved. No, but I think that it will get the attention of the department more so than if no one does any complaints about anything. Because if there are no complaints, again, what does it look like to the department? Wow, the school's fantastic, right? They've done no wrong. So I hope that answers kind of your question. We have another question that says, I feel like they need to change the terminology of deficient. I hear you, and most may agree with you. At this time, and especially for purposes of this training, we do talk about how the IEP is driven by deficits. It's a deficit-driven process. So I hear you, and we're with you in terms of let's use more empowering language. Let's use language that really reflects the skills of our children. And on the other hand, for purposes of conversations of the IEP, I do want to say it's usually the language that currently is used, and it's usually what drives the provision of services, that you're almost needing to prove how deficient, right? How many needs does my son or daughter have? But I hear you, and especially as an advocate, I hear you on the change of that terminology. Okay, so with this graph, this bell curve, what we discussed, and I think there's another question, who do we contact if the state rep does not do their job? So again, it depends what it means by does not do their job. If by does not do their job, you mean they violated the IEP, or I'm sorry, they did not implement, they did not comply or implement the IEP, then you can do a state compliance. If they violated your right, and or if they violated the law, if that's what you mean by they did not do their job, then who do you contact? The state, the department, the California Department of Education, through the use of a state compliance complaint. Okay, so last week we talked about how if your son or daughter measures within this area, this average or better, if their evaluation reflects that they are within the average or better, then it is very likely that your son, let me know, put it on the chat, will or will not receive services. If your son scores average or above, will they receive services? Yes or no? What do you think? Someone says no.
It depends.
Sure, it can depend, and usually though, no. Why? Because they are within the average. They are the same as any other student. They're not demonstrating deficiency, right? So This is why it's so important for us to know what the evaluation report says, because if you already look at your evaluation report and you see that they identified that your son or daughter falls within the average, then you already know that very likely when you go to the recommendations part of that report, it's also going to say 0 services. You can already expect that. So typically, if they are within the average or even above, you can almost be assured that the recommendation is going to be no services. If your son or daughter, right, lies, tests, their test results, identify that they fall below average, typically you could expect that they will suggest some services. If your son or daughter falls within the deficient category, then usually that means they're probably going to offer more services. Let me recap a little bit here. Remember that last week we said it doesn't say in the law that the school has to give you the evaluation report before the IEP meeting. However, you can request that they give you the evaluation report 3 days before the IEP, 5 days before the IEP, and you can use the logic that the law does say. It doesn't say they have to give you the report before the IEP, but it does say that you are an equal participant of the IEP. So if everyone else has had access to view the evaluation report except you, how does that make you equal in terms of participation? They're going to participate because they've had the chance to look at the evaluation report, but you have not, right? So using that logic, you can request that the evaluation report be given to you prior to the meeting. 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, right? So you have the chance to look at the report and be able to prepare for, okay, I'm already expecting that they're going to tell me no services. Okay. Last week, we also reviewed what are the questions that you have to ask yourself as you read this report. Number one, what type of scores are they using to report the results? The results can be reported in percentage. Okay. If you see the percentages right here in the bottom line, they could be reported in standard scores, or they could be recorded in subtest scores, T-scores, or Z-scores. Keep in mind that percentage, for example, 50% of percentage is the same as 100 in standard score, which equals 10 in subtest scores, which equals 50 in T-score and 0 in Z-score. The way that we understood this last week is these are like different measurements, if you would, right? If you convert a percentage into a standard score, it's 100. For example, I can tell you, I'm going to give you $1, or I'm going to give you 4 quarters. The $1 is equal to 4 quarters. 4 quarters are equal to 10 dimes. 10 dimes are equal to 100 pennies, right? So as we go down this line, percentage is 50, standard score is 100, subtest score is 10, T-score is 50, Z-score is 0. All these numbers equal the same thing. They're just reported in different kind of scores. So when you get your evaluation report, one of the first questions you're going to want to answer for yourself is how were the scores reported? In percentage, in standard score, in subtest, T or Z score, right? Because then you could look at the numbers, and if the number says it's reported in standard scores, and usually they are, not always, but usually they're reported in standard scores, and you see that your son tested 30 in standard score. What would, and feel free to use the chat or open your mic, what would a 30 in standard score be? Would it be average, above average, below, or deficient. 30 in standard score.
Deficient.
Absolutely. Deficient. And not just deficient, but very. Because if you look here, right, it's kind of going by fives. 85, 80, 75, 70, 65, 60, 55, 50, 45, right? And your son was in 30. So if we're looking at this image and in the deficient category, they should be giving you more services. The lower you go on the deficient category, the more that you can advocate for more services. Because look at all the journey that they have to travel back to test with an average, right? So you knowing this information is gold, right? If you already know, man, my son scored 30 standard score and they're recommending 0 services, I already know that I'm going to go with the question, please explain to me how that makes sense, right? I don't understand. My son is way on the deficit side, but yet your report recommends no intervention, no services. How will my son make progress without intervention, right? Those are great questions, okay? Sometimes they'll say, right, your son indeed is 30 standard score, which is very deficient, and we recommend 0 services. Remember that in the last session, we discussed that the document is internally inconsistent. I put it on the chat. Meaning the document on one hand is saying my son is on the deficit category, and yet on the other part of the report, meaning on the recommendations, it's saying 0 services. It is internally inconsistent. It's contradicting itself, okay? Now, so question number 1, when you get the evaluation report, question number 1 is, in what type of scores are the scores being provided? So that you can graph this for yourself. And remember, you have blank bell curves on your Google Drive, okay? So if you wanna print some of those out and then do it for yourself, you can definitely do that, okay? So question number 1, what scores are being, in what scores are they being reported, okay? Question number 2, do I agree with where they say, where their evaluation says that my son or daughter is? Do I even agree with that? Okay. 3rd, do I agree with the recommendations that they're making? If the answer to either of these 2 is no, I don't agree with this evaluation because they said my son is in the 50 percentile for speech and language, but he speaks 5 words and he is 12 years old. How are you telling me that he's within the average? Then you are in disagreement with the evaluation. Or 2, if your son falls within the deficient category, but they recommended 0 services, then it sounds like you disagree. If you disagree, remember we reviewed last week, then you can ask for an IEE, an independent educational evaluation. It's kind of like a second opinion, and the evaluation would be conducted by someone that is not under the district. The district pays for it, but the evaluator is independent, or is supposed to be, okay? So keep that in mind. Why is this so important? Because I want to go into that meeting knowing, being ready to agree or disagree with the evaluation and be ready to request an independent evaluation. And we're going to get into more details about that. I'm seeing a question. The IEP works with the school. What can the state of California do to help your child out further at home? I think, for example, extra services at home from the state, financial means to hire extra help, etc. Great question. This would sort of be a different topic when we talk about services in the home and community. those would come from generic resources such as your medical insurance, IHSS, SSI, and the regional center. So school's responsibility is their academic achievement in the school. Anything with home and community will either be for regional center to provide services for, and even before going to regional center, it would be generic resources, which is anything that is not regional center. Again, your insurance, IHSS, SSI, any free services in the community, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and if you have questions on that, you want to know more about regional center, what can they offer, all of that, please feel free to give us a call. Is it possible for results to be skewed? Interpretation of assessor skewed. IEE, that was a question. Is it possible for results to be skewed? I without much knowledge of like everything that you mean with your question, I'm going to say sure. Right? Which is why you have the right to disagree. Okay, so if you feel that those numbers are skewed, again, what do you mean my son tested at 50 percentile for speech and language when they don't communicate at the level that they should be communicating based on their age and grade and all of that, right? So in your terms, it looks skewed, right? What do I do? What do I have the option of doing? Saying, I do not agree with this evaluation. I am requesting an independent educational evaluation. Okay, so now remember that last week we identified when you request an independent educational evaluation, I'll call it IEE. Now, when you request an IEE, the school only has two options. They either say, yes, we will pay for the IEE, or they take you to due process. And the person who prior, a little while ago, said the burden of proof, notice, if the school doesn't want to approve or say yes to paying for your IEE, they should be taking you to due process, meaning the burden of proof is on them. Okay, those are their only two options. If they are saying, if they're not saying anything, right? They're not saying, no, we won't do the IEE, and they're not taking it a due process. They're out of compliance. They're violating the law. They either need to say, yes, we will give you the IEE, or nope, and we're taking you to due process. Beware of it flipping around on you and them saying, well, if you don't agree, you could take us to a due process. They only have two options when it comes to the IEE. Okay, again, they can only either approve, say, okay, we'll pay for it, or they take you to due process. If it's related to this, there is not a reason why you should be taking the school to a due process. Because remember, you're now putting on you the burden of proof when it doesn't belong to you, because the law says they must either pay your IEE or take you to due process. Okay, so keep that in mind. Meaning, is this when we request an IEE? Yes, correct. So if you feel like the results are skewed, or you feel like the recommendations do not match with the scores that your son was given, absolutely. This is when you request it. This is exactly when you have the right to request an IEE. Okay, so again, remember, you have the right to request an evaluation every year. Thus, you also have the right to request an IEE if you don't agree with the schools every year. Okay, so know that that goes hand in hand. How do they test in academics? Excuse me. Excuse me, versus speech and OT. Good question. I hope this answers your question, but I have this book here. This book, let me take off my virtual background, and I could put a picture of this book on your Google Drive so that you have it. I didn't think of doing that. Give me 1 second. In case you want a screenshot right now, let me show you this. This book is called The Special Educator's Comprehensive Guide to 301 Diagnostic Tests. Okay. And this is from, here you go, if you want to take a picture of it. And this is from, let me see what, just so you know. This is from 2006, okay? They sell this, I believe, on Amazon and all that. The reason I bring this up in reference to this question is you can, they can use a number of evaluations. This is a thick book, right? A number of evaluations to look at the academics part, to look at speech, OT, okay? So for example, I'm randomly reopening the book and there's an evaluation for test of reading comprehension, test of word reading efficiency, okay? For speech and language, there is the articulation proficiency scale or the language test or language fundamentals 4, comprehensive receptive and expressive vocabulary test, 2nd edition, early language milestone scale, 2nd edition, comprehensive test of phonological processing, so phonetics, evaluating acquired skills in communication, assessment of aphasia and related impairments. So there are tons of evaluations, okay? Now, let me say this. I think it's going to come up right now on our screen in further slides. But we don't get to choose what evaluation they're going to use. We get to express the area of concern. And as the evaluators, they sort of choose what they're going to use to test in that area. Okay. But having this can be quite handy for you to even look at what areas they can evaluate. Okay. So again, I'll put a picture of this book on your Google Drive after the presentation. If you click on the link, you will be able to look at all that is in there. Okay. Yes. So someone said we need to be specific about the presenting problem. So that indeed is where that indeed is your biggest job, right? Identifying the need, establishing the need. Okay. And what's the presenting problem, which is why, again, this talk of deficits, it's really important, right? Unfortunately, all while we know the strengths of our kids, the potential of our children, when we're looking for services, we really must focus on the presenting issues or problems and or deficits. And this person says, I had to ask for a test for executive functioning. Okay, so again, it may serve you to have this book handy in order to reference what's even available, right? And then maybe it can give you more of an understanding of what you can request, okay? So great questions, by the way. Let's continue. Here you'll see, I won't go into too much details, but here you can see how the scores are converted, right? So if you say, oh, it was a standard score of 145, you know that it would be a 19 subtest score or below 99 in percentage rank. Okay, so this sort of just helps you convert. Evaluations generally use one of these 3 type of scores. Okay. This here, again, this one we don't have to go too much into it, but this, just kind of imagine that this is a blank bell curve, okay, for you to be able to sort of graph your child's evaluation results. If multiple evaluations were done, then in the red line, you can graph the dot, right? So imagine that this is a blank version of this, right? Okay, so here you can, let's say for speech and language comprehension or something, they tested right here. And then for another evaluation, they tested over here. So this is kind of a template that can help you have a general vision of your child based on all the evaluations that were conducted. So this is on your Google Drive. You can print these out as well. Okay. Just for the sake of time, I'm gonna skip through some of this, but just know that these are examples, right, of what a child could look like, their skills when they're being evaluated. So they can have a full scale IQ of 101, right? And you can see this person has better comprehension skills, 124, versus perceptual reasoning, 88. Their working memory is sort of in the middle there, 110. But look, we know that their processing speed is actually the lowest score of these. So how might this inform us? This might tell me, if I'm looking at the profile of this student, I might say they're probably going to need an accommodation for more time for tests, right? Because their processing speed is sort of on the lower scale of the scores, okay? So speed at which information is processed, if it takes them more time, or if they process slower, they're probably going to need more time for their test to comprehend, right? Or this may lead us to wonder, hey, I'd like to know if my son processes better verbally or visually or hands-on, right? This might give us a better indication. What supports do my son need so that he can process faster? Does he process language better auditorily? Does he prefer reading or pictures or choices, right? So this is when we mean evaluations gives us a lot of information so that we can then have insight on what services they need, what accommodations, modifications, what placement will be the most appropriate, etc. Okay, so again, if the processing speed is low, then it's for you to decide, right? Do I agree that my son should probably not be in mainstream? I'm not saying that they shouldn't. I'm saying you may then say, wow, I mean, in mainstream, they go really fast, right? I think that it would suit him best to maybe be in a special day class or an autism focused class where they use more tactile, where they use more visual supports, because given the results that my son processes at a slower rate, what's going to be the best placement for him to learn in? Okay, so this is how this type of information can help us. Okay, so similarly here we see someone's IQ is at 58, their verbal comprehension is the best out of all, and again the lowest score is processing speed. Okay, and verbal comprehension, then this may mean maybe they're not, this lets me know their strength is verbal comprehension. Okay, not perceptual reasoning, it's verbal comprehension. So let's see, perhaps they need things more verbal to process information, right? So you can deduce what these things mean. Okay, so now let's get into a little bit of the timelines for evaluations. Excuse me. When you request an evaluation in writing, remember, and you should have receipt or proof that they received your request. So when you request your evaluation in writing, the school must send you an assessment plan within 15 calendar days. This is why it's important for you to do it in writing, because that from that day that they received it, the clock starts. Okay, so they have 15 days to give you an assessment plan. Know that the assessment plan must be in the language you understand, unless it is not feasible. Perhaps if it's a language that is from a tribe, right, where it's not one of those threshold languages where they have no resources to translate into that particular tribal language, that's when it means unless not feasible. Okay, very good. I see a question. Does that include exclude holidays, breaks, etc.? We're going to get more into those details. For now, I'll say calendar days, unless it says otherwise, it means calendar days, including weekends and holidays. Okay, whenever the law says days, it usually means calendar days, unless it says otherwise. And there are more details about breaks, so I'll get into that in just a minute. Okay, so you give them the request for an evaluation. They have 15 calendar days. to give you an assessment plan in the language that you understand. You then generally have 15 calendar days to respond to the assessment plan, meaning consent to the assessment plan. It says you generally have 15 days. Federally, it's 15 days. That's what the law says. Sometimes schools may do it within less, or, it may change it from state to state, things like that. But keep in mind 15. They have 15 days to give it to you. You have 15 days to request it, okay? But some districts may make it longer, okay? They may give you a little more time to return the assessment plan, okay? And make sure you know the time frame. So that's why we kind of say, just stick to the 15 days in your mind so that you don't go beyond that. The law says at least 15 days, okay? So they could give you more, but do it probably, just to be safe, within those 15 days, okay? Now, if you don't respond, if you don't give the assessment report back to them within those 15 calendar days, the school assumes that you are saying, no, I do not consent for my son or daughter to have this evaluation, okay? That's very important because, and pardon me, that's why it's very important that you have proof that they received your correspondence, okay? One more reason why it's important. If you don't have proof that the school received it and you do a complaint, and they may just say, we never received the assessment plan returned from the parent, so we just assumed it was a no, right? And that might be it. And, oh, I'm so sorry, let's start the process again. And there's a delay that happens, right? Versus if you have proof that they indeed received it, then obviously you have proof that they have violated that timeline, okay? So that way you can be sure that they received it and you have proof to demonstrate that you indeed did reply and give your consent for this evaluation, okay? So always, it helps you to do things in writing and, again, have your receipt. From the day the school receives, so you request it, they have 15 days to give you an assessment plan. You usually have at least 15 days to give it back to them. From the day that the school receives your consent, your signed assessment plan, they must conduct, the evaluation and have the IEP meeting within 60 days. And again, unless the law says different, then it's usually calendar days, okay? So if they are beyond the 60 days, what happens? They're in violation. You may do a state compliance complaint. And again, that's why it's so important that you keep your things in writing and that you keep track of when things were given, received, so that you can track when they are now in violation. We still want to, of course, remain reasonable, right? If let's say it's the 62nd day and they're like, yeah, they haven't done it, you can legally, you can do your complaint. You may want to say, well, what's reasonable, right? Up to you, okay? But legally, they have 60 days, and anything after that, they're in violation, okay? Now, you must make your child available for the evaluation. So if, let's say, you sign the consent of the assessment plan, giving consent for your son or daughter to be evaluated, okay? And then your son or daughter doesn't go to school for the next month, the school might argue you didn't make your child available for that evaluation. That's why we haven't conducted it. And thus, we are going to be beyond the 60 days that the law permits. Okay. Now, here's just a little graphic for you to have an idea of what this timeline looks like. So again, the parent requests an evaluation at day 1. 15 days go. The school must give you an evaluation plan. Then after that, you have 15 days to return it to them. From the day that you return it to them, they now have 60 days to do the evaluation and to hold the IEP to discuss that evaluation. If these things are not followed, the school is in violation of the law. Now, to the question about the breaks. Calendar days, meaning including holidays and weekends, except for vacation breaks that are more than 5 calendar days. If they have a break that is more than 5 calendar days, then the clock stops, okay? Those days do not count. So if you request, I'm gonna go back here. If let's say you request the evaluation, they give you the consent form, you gave it back to them, and then 10 days go by, but then it's summer break or a 2-week Christmas break, the clock stops. And then when you return from Christmas break or summer break, the clock starts from where it stopped, okay? So if only 10 days had gone by and then you went on Christmas break or summer break, then when you come back, it starts at day 11. Okay, so vacations or breaks for more than 5 days do not count. Again, if they don't follow this timeline that we've discussed, you can do a state compliance complaint. Okay, all right. The evaluation materials and procedures. So, remember we talked about the legal requirements. Some of those legal requirements are that the procedures and the materials must be free of racial, cultural, and sexual discrimination. They must be presented in the student's native language unless clearly not feasible, just like the other time that we discussed this, okay? So it's important for you to identify what is the dominant language of your child. I would make a note here for non-English speakers, so the Spanish speakers that are on the other line, thank you to the interpreters. Keep in mind, your language as a parent, your preference may be Spanish, but if your child's language, their primary language is English, make sure that that is identified, because sometimes it is given in the preferred language of the parent, not of the student. Okay. Now, in speaking of language, you may consider one concept. Now, we're not saying this, we're presenting this as an option for you to explore. I can't give you exact details of how much success this has had, but if your son or daughter communicates through an alternative method of communication, such as some children with autism use PECS, the picture exchange communication, meaning their method of communication is pictures, not words, not written words. Other individuals, their method of communication is using a device to type. So if that is the primary language, if that is the primary method of communication for your son or daughter, you may want to put that down as their primary language, because then what does that mean? That the evaluation tool should then be conducted, or the evaluation should be conducted in the preferred language of your son or daughter, which means that should the evaluation be conducted with pictures versus a test looking form? Yeah, right? Again, can't really specify to you how that flies or what the outcome of that might be with different districts, but it's enough of a concept for us to put in your mind for you to consider. Because again, indeed, for some of your children, their method of communication is pictures or is using some other kind of device, okay? So evaluations must include relevant functional, developmental, and academic information. Okay, and let me catch this question before we move on. If last year's assessment hasn't passed a year yet and you request a new one, does the 15 calendar days still apply? Good question. I think what I'm understanding is if the year is almost up, can I request it prior to the year kind of expiring so that by the time the year anniversary comes, they're already working on the evaluation. You can, but usually you request it once that year has been completed, right? Like then you can request a new one. But if it's days like that, like it's almost days before the year, I would say you could try, right, to request it a little bit before the year is up so that we can already get the ball rolling. You can. And I don't know that I have too much to report of like if families have done that. Have I heard of it going smoothly or the school saying, nope, you can't because the year's not up yet? I'm not too sure. I don't get that question too much, but it's a good one. So you may want to explore that. Okay. Excuse me. So the evaluation must be used to measure things for which the evaluation is valid and reliable, meaning the evaluation that they use should be evaluating only the things that the evaluation was created to evaluate, okay? So you might want to ask yourself in terms of this, is the evaluation's version current? What is the current version of the evaluation? You want to make sure it's up to date. Again, that book that we talked about might help you, okay? Or looking it up. What's the latest version of this evaluation? They might be using one that is not the most recent. Does it truly measure what it's supposed to measure? Okay? Are they doing a social emotional evaluation, but using a tool that is not really measuring that? Okay? Are the results consistent over time? Those are good questions, right? You may want to explore or research this evaluation a little bit. Okay. All instruments are not created equal. And what we mean by this is there's the child's qualities inform the test selection, meaning every child who has difficulty with speech and language will not be given the same evaluation. Because as you saw, when I read in the book of 301 evaluation tools, there might be one evaluation that is more appropriate for this person versus a different one. Okay, so not all instruments are created equal. Some are specifically created to test nonverbal cognitive skills for children with autism versus untimed tests for kids with ADHD versus a child who were testing their comprehension versus their articulation versus their phonetics, etc. Right? So not all tests are created equal. The evaluations must be conducted by trained and knowledgeable people. Okay? Meaning the evaluator should have experience and should be trained on how to do that particular assessment. There's 301 evaluations, right? Is the evaluator competent and knowledgeable to use the evaluation tool that they have chosen? Okay, so here is something that may be quite useful for you. Okay, so there is a website called DCA, and actually I already had it pulled up. Everyone sees it says California Department of Consumer Affairs. Everybody see that?
Yes.
Thank you. So this site allows you to look up people who have licenses, different kind of licenses. You can even look up a chiropractor, a hairstylist to see if their license is up to date, a marriage and family therapist if you're going to one, a clinical social worker. So this, if you go down here and you press license search, okay, you get to look up the person to see if their license is even up to date. Let me make sure I press the right thing. Yeah, license search. Does anyone have a name that they would like to offer for this example? Is anyone have a doctor in mind, or some doctor or some sort of therapist that you would like to look up their, if they're current? Any occupational therapists? Anyone with a name there? Chris Davison. Okay. And are they an occupational therapist? Are they behavior? Speech and language? Do you know? Is that psychology? Okay. So we're going to look under psychology. Okay. Board of Psychology. We're going to put license type. Do you know? I'm going to put psychologist, and we're going to put their first name, Chris. This is public information. Okay. Okay. And I see another question. I'll get to that in just a little bit. Davidson. Okay. If you would have their license number, you could put it here or their business name, but we're going to do a search. Okay. As you see, you then look for that person. Okay. We see a Davidson Christine, but we're looking for Chris. Okay. Cheryl. So you go down here. Huh. Doesn't look like they're coming up, but let's use this as an example. Let's say I indeed was looking for Christine Davidson. There's her license number. Okay, license type, psychologist, license status. The license was canceled. Okay, when did it expire? Whoa, we went way back here. When did it expire? 1983. Okay, a little before I was born. They were in Newport, Oregon. And this is some of the address information. So let's say here, let's say it wasn't expired that long ago. But look, if let's say you research the person's license and it comes up as canceled, they should not be conducting that evaluation. They don't even have a license for it anymore. Okay, and you can see when it expired. Okay, let's see Davidson Cheryl. Okay, they're a psychologist and their license was renewed and is current. Awesome. This little question mark even tells you the licensee meets requirements for the practice of psychology in California. Okay, so this person, Cheryl, is up to date and current, and it expires in August of 2024. Okay, all these people look, license renewed and current, renewed and current. Okay, so very well. Okay, so this, can be a very helpful tool. Okay, and I'm telling you, you could go here and there's a chiropractic, okay, behavioral sciences, occupational. I think there's cosmetology here. It might have acupuncture. I was in a car accident once and I was going to go to an acupuncturist and I said, let me look them up. And yeah, they were current. So good, right? Accountancy. So your dentist, you want to look him, her up, type their name, see if they're current. Okay. So again, this can help you determine if indeed the person that is conducting the evaluation is indeed experienced in that evaluation they're conducting. Okay. Okay. Give me 1 second. It says, I saw a question. I see it in Spanish. I'm going to read it in English. Hello, my daughter has auditory problems. Can I request an evaluation or in audiology or a hearing evaluation? The answer is yes. Yes. So evaluations can be, because again, with the hearing, if your daughter isn't hearing well, then that is obviously possibly creating a barrier for her to gain anything from her academic experience, right? If she's not hearing well, then there needs to be their services, accommodations, supports, etc. And again, remember, you can request evaluations in areas of disability that have already been identified or suspected areas of disability. Okay, so what I hear you saying, the person who wrote the question, is I'm suspecting that my daughter has hearing problems, right? And can I have an evaluation? Absolutely. Again, the answer is yes. Do it in writing, okay, and have receipt that they received it. All right, so we're gonna pick up the pace a little bit, hopefully, just given our time, so we could leave a little bit of time for questions. Keep in mind, they must follow the directions given by the test manufacturer. So again, that book could be quite handy, okay? And all that means is, yes, they must be following what that evaluation guide says, okay? And they must be standardized. The evaluation has to be given. That's why there's a book with a tool, right? The tool, it needs to be conducted the same way. If it's conducted differently each time, your results are going to be different each time. So evaluation tools are standardized for that reason, okay? They must assess specific areas of need. Okay, and they must accurately measure what is trying to be measured. Okay, so they must be using sound practices. They should not be using a single measure. They must use a variety of tools and strategies. So part of the evaluation tool should come with a variety of tools and strategies to be able to conduct that evaluation. Okay, this is very important. Evaluation findings should discuss the environmental impact of learning. Remember that last week we talked about the concept, which is a very famous concept in special education, of the least restrictive environment. Okay, the least restrictive environment is the general education setting. A mainstream classroom, that is the least restrictive environment because it is where a student in a general education, mainstream education, that's where they learn, right? So what's the least restrictive environment? Whatever allows them to be as close as the environment of someone without a disability. That being said, they may be in a more restrictive environment if it's appropriate, okay? So keep in mind that evaluation findings should discuss what would the least restrictive environment be based on the impact on their learning. If they're in mainstream, what would be the impact, right? And that will give insight on what type of setting should they be in, should they be learning in, okay? Must evaluate all educational needs impacted by the suspected disability, including but not limited to, and let's go to the next slide, speech and language, self-help skills, social emotional, behavioral, motor, academic, cognitive, vision, hearing, career and vocational development, health, which could mean developmental and medical, and orientation and mobility. Okay, so all of these per se are fair game, right? We're looking at any and all areas of suspected disability. If you notice, there's an emotional, social emotional, behavioral component here. That means for some of you, some of your kids, some of your children, you may say they are not the same since COVID. They are depressed, they're anxious, they develop behaviors that were never there. They may then need, this might be a new suspected disability. Do they have generalized anxiety disorder? Do they have clinical depression? Have they developed OCD, okay, obsessive compulsive disorder? Any area of suspected disability that is affecting their academic progress, you can request an evaluation, okay? So looking at this may be helpful. They must use all data. Know that when evaluations are conducted, they will ask you for information, okay? It must include information provided by parents, okay? You have observed your son in all areas of their functioning. So it is appropriate for your input to be part of that evaluation, okay? The information, the data must be objective and subjective, okay? And they must objectify the subjective data. Sounds like a tongue twister, right? But objective meaning whatever evaluator is conducting that evaluation, the results should be objectified in order for us to say any evaluator who would have evaluated would have gotten the same thing, because I am objectifying these results. Every time we should be getting the same results if the evaluation is conducted in the same manner, okay? Again, I'm gonna go through some of these a little bit quicker. So for example, tracking behavior and attitude using daily communication sheets, okay, to look for present levels of academic achievement. There must be tools to use to assess all of this, okay? How are they objectively gonna track behavior and attitude using certain sheets or using actual tools? How long does it take from when you request the evaluation before the school actually does it? So remember, we reviewed that timeline a few minutes ago. When you request an evaluation, they have 15 days to give you an assessment plan. You then have 15 days to give them back the signed assessment plan. From the day that they get it back, the school has 60 days to hold the evaluation or to conduct the evaluation and to hold the IEP meeting where this evaluation will be discussed, okay? So they have 60 days after they receive your consent. But remember that we discussed, if there is a break for more than 5 days, like for Christmas or summer, the clock stops, okay? And then it continues when school continues, okay? I'm going to go through some of this just to be able to get to some of these important questions and reminders, okay? So you could ask yourself, who is administering the evaluation? Does the manufacturer allow the test to be administered in other languages? These are questions for you to kind of ask yourself as you learn more about evaluations and what it should be answering and producing. Okay. Did the evaluator observe your child? If the answer is yes, the other question that's going to be important is, when did they evaluate it? Where? What was he doing? Some of you may agree, evaluating your child in the morning may produce very different results than if they evaluate them after lunch. Okay, maybe in the morning they're a little bit more anxious, and after lunch, because they're going home already, they're a little bit more calm, or vice versa. When they just get there, they're very anxious, and then or they're very calm, and then they get anxious as they're going to leave school, whatever it may be. Okay, so these again are questions for you to consider and concepts to even just read and know in preparation for you requesting an evaluation. Okay, and again, the evaluator gets to choose the test. They are the expert for that issue. But again, if you don't agree with what the evaluation produced or what results or recommendations it produced, you get to have or request an IEE. Okay, this gives you more information on the IEEs, which we already spoke about. Okay, you have the right to a second opinion. The school district must pay for the IEE or take you to due process. We already discussed this. Now, very important, when choosing, if you indeed disagree with an evaluation conducted by the school, and if you indeed request an independent evaluation, an IEE, please keep these following things in mind. When choosing the independent evaluator, make sure that they are agreeing to attend the IEP in order to present their evaluation report to the IEP team. Okay, very important. If they say, I'll do the evaluation, but I don't attend IEPs, you may not want to get that evaluator, right? Because they're not going to sit at the table with the team to be able to defend their evaluation or present their evaluation. Okay, now keep in mind, it's up to you, but keep in mind that they may be willing to attend in alternate ways, right? Maybe they'll be present by phone, they'll be present by Zoom or whatever it may be. Some IEPs may be taking a hybrid approach of some people are in person, others are on Zoom or both. So make sure that they are agreeing to attend the IEP. Also make sure that the independent evaluator is agreeing to include recommendations on the evaluation report. Some evaluators may just evaluate and tell you where your son lies, for example, on that bell curve, without providing recommendations. You likely want an evaluation report that provides where your son or daughter was found, like where did they test, what scores, and also to make recommendations for goals, include in their evaluation recommendations for accommodations, modifications, services, and placement. You want that evaluator to say, hey, based on what you observe in my child, what are your recommendations for all these areas? Goals, accommodations, modifications, services, and placement. If they say, oh, I only do an evaluation and I don't give recommendations, again, you may consider that that's not what you may want to do. Okay. Be aware of the mistakes independent evaluators can make so you can help them avoid it, such as not including recommendations, not attending the meetings. Right here, this link, you can press it and you can find more information on this topic. Okay, now, before we sort of close, very important. If you pay out of your pocket money for your own independent evaluation, okay, and it is used to construct the IEP, then according to FAPE, because the law says that your son and daughter is entitled to a free, appropriate public education, because of that, then that means the school has to reimburse you for what you paid for the evaluation. Okay, so again, when you request an IEE, if you end up paying for it, okay, or let's say prior to requesting an IEE from the school, you had already paid for one from the outside, someone, and then you ask the school for an IEE and they say, sure, we'll do the we'll pay for the IEE. And then you say, oh, well, here it is, right? And you paid for it, then they must reimburse you for that payment if they are indeed going to use that evaluation to inform the IEP. Okay, if in this process there are violations or lack of implementation by the school, then again, what is usually your next step, or what could be your next step? A state compliance complaint. In your Google Drive, you have a state compliance complaint for you to look at, for you to see how you would fill it out, for you to call us and ask us if you have any question, ask us, any questions that you may have. We want to say, we often say the best time to fill out a state compliance complaint is when you don't have to. Meaning, if right now everything is fine and great with the school, take this time that is a non-crisis time to get familiar with the paperwork so that if and when, and most likely when, you need to do a state compliance complaint, you're now a little stressed and in crisis, and you're having to learn how to fill out something new. Okay, so we always suggest, if right now is a non-stressful time for you, wonderful. Hopefully it stays that way. But because the likelihood that something may, go off with the school at some point, we suggest get familiar with those things now. Okay. All right. Here at the end, we have a few review things. You can review this on your own time. Toward the end, we also have a list of resources that we highly recommend, phone numbers, websites. You can look at this. Let's learn how to ask questions, 8 steps to a better IEP, etc. You have all these links. I want to point out there are podcasts I don't know about you. I love podcasts. Whenever I'm driving, whenever I'm washing dishes, I can just listen. I'm a better listener than a reader. I feel a little bit, I read slower. I comprehend better through auditory. So I love podcasts. So there's a few podcasts. There's one on what is an evaluation, and you can either get it through a podcast app on your phone, or I've provided you also the YouTube link, and you can look at it there. I also did, there's also a podcast called Inclusive Education, and then I did a general search for more podcasts on just education. So if you click on the link that I've provided you, you're going to see just a long list based on a Google search. Okay, so it'll look something like this. Excuse me. So here you go. Here are 42, if not more, different podcasts on special education, and you can look at these. Okay, and lastly, please feel free to contact us. We do have a mailing list if you would like to be part of our mailing list so that you can learn about more IEPs, etc. Please feel free to be in contact with us. Right now, as we take the last few minutes to answer any remaining questions, we do have a poll, and Cindy or Antonio, if you would do us the favor of launching the poll, please take a few moments as we answer questions to answer the poll. It really helps us, probably Long Beach Forward too. I know for us, it helps us to be able to justify the need for continued trainings and for us to be able to continue conducting trainings like this one. Okay, so thank you to Long Beach Forward. Thank you to the interpreters. And know that these trainings are available online. You can listen to them, and know that in a week, not next Thursday, but the following, if I'm not mistaken, Cindy, we will do this once again for 3 weeks, 3 Thursdays in Spanish. And I believe there will be translation in English. Is that correct? So I'll give it to Cindy and Antonio, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sophia. Yes, in March, 2nd, 9th, and 16th, we will be conducting the same workshop, except it's going to be in Spanish, and we will have English translation available.
Perfect.
So I also want to remind everyone that if you're part of the Long Beach Unified School District, we do have a community advisory committee meeting every second Wednesday of the month. So next month, it would be Wednesday, March 8th at the Teacher Resource Center from 6 to 8, and they will be discussing recommendations for the district and the Board of Education. So this is where parents get together to start making policy changes. And if you have a recommendation, it could be more training for staff or safety for your children, you are more than welcome to come out and fill out the form. And hopefully you're selected to be one of the parents to present in front of the Board of Education and other Long Beach Unified School District officials. If you have any questions, can someone please drop my information? I will be more than happy to assist you with any questions in regards to the CAC meetings. And if you need more information on Sophia, we can go ahead and give you that information as well. Do we have any last questions or clarifications before we leave?
Cindy, if I may, on your I could share screen just really quickly. I just want to let you guys know our office, our LA office, every Monday at 10 a.m. we conduct trainings on a range of topics. So if you go right here to your Google Drive and you go to SCDD flyers, you'll be able to see that we have a statewide calendar. Excuse me. So if you're really interested in special education, know that in the summer, we will be doing 4 sessions on special education. One day it's in English, one topic, and then we repeat that same topic in Spanish. Okay, so please feel free to look. Right now, we are 216. We are still completing our Regional Center series. So if you have questions on Regional Center, you are more than welcome. The Zoom information remains the same all year long. So if you just want to have this handy on your phone, tune in every time at 10 o'clock, see if you are interested in the topic. If not, feel free to disconnect whatever you'd like. Please feel free. You could also join just by phone. The information remains the same every single Monday. This Monday is a holiday, so you won't see us there, but any other Monday that's not a holiday, you will see us there, okay?
We have one more question, Ophelia.
Mhm.
Let's see. Ophelia wrote, my son's last triennial evaluation was on May 23rd, 2022, but I was not happy with it. Yes, I signed it on June 8th, 2022, but when can I request another one?
Well, it looks like if it was conducted on 5/23/22, then anytime after 5/23/23, so in after the 23rd of May, you can begin requesting the next one because you can do it every year. Okay. Now, you weren't happy with it, which means back then you could have said, I don't agree with this evaluation, and right there request an independent evaluation. Being that so much time has passed by, it may now be more so make sense to wait for you to be able to request the next evaluation because the year is almost over. If you don't agree with that one, then please feel free in the IEP to say I disagree and I'm requesting an independent evaluation. Okay. And I think there's one person that was asking if they can unmute to ask a question.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm new to
Oh,
all of this.
that's what I was-
My first question
Mhm.
is, so my son is 4 and he's currently in a private preschool, and we have noticed some, concentration focusing concerns. So my first step, I don't know if I'm doing this the right way. So I'm first getting him an appointment with a neurologist to get him evaluated and get him diagnosed for ADHD, which I think is what he has. Is that the right step to do that? Or can I just go to his, which will be John Muir, will be his school of choice in elementary? Do I just go straight to them and request an evaluation? Or what would be my first step to just kind of get him diagnosed? Because I think that's what it is, but I don't know.
I hear you. Yeah. Well, it's good to do it with the doctor, for him to get a diagnosis that can help you present it to the different systems. However, the school will still do their own evaluation. So while you're conducting the whatever test with the doctor, you can already request it from the school so that process could get going. They
Okay.
may ask you for whatever the doctor said, but regardless of what the doctor said, my understanding is they still conduct their own stuff. And also keep in mind, to be eligible for special education, it's not just the diagnosis that will get them in the door. It's the diagnosis, and what the school is going to evaluate is, does their need impede their academic functioning, right?
Okay.
Because there may be children with autism who have autism and they have a diagnosis, but they're not affected in their academics, right?
Okay.
So those students may not be eligible for special ed, even though they have a diagnosis. So
Okay.
know that school is not just looking for the diagnosis, they're looking to see if he meets the criteria for the eligibility of special education. So they're kind of two different processes. You can also initiate an evaluation with the regional center, because that's a separate system where you might be able to get services for home and community. And they also have an eligibility criteria that's different than the schools, right? So typically at 3, you're wanting to access both worlds, special education and regional center, right? And because they're both different houses, different departments, different laws, they each have eligibility criteria that's very different.
Okay.
So right now you may want to do your doctor, begin the special ed evaluation, and begin your regional center evaluation.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, thank you so
I
much.
know it's a lot of info. Any questions, free to give us a call, Nancy, okay?
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
The last question we'll take, your name says me. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my question is in relation to IEP meeting timeframes. My child has a big team, and unfortunately, the school that he attends is only willing and very frequently only wanting to provide a 1-hour meeting, which I don't find to be sufficient. So I'm wondering if there's like some type of rule or some type of law that I could reference in order to request a longer time frame for an IEP, because what ends up happening is even if I request a continuation, they won't hold a meeting for like 2 or 3 months out.
Sure. Great question. So no, there is nowhere in the law that says that there is a limit to the time frame. It doesn't mention the word like condense, like it's not like we're going to be asking for a meeting every month or every day, right? But you are an equal participant in that meeting. Meaning what that logic means is if you're in that meeting, you have the right for your questions to be answered and for you to know what's going on with your child. So if there are still questions you have, the meeting is over because, oh, our staff have to go, or it's lunchtime, or whatever their reasoning is, you do have the right to say this, I'm not done with my questions. We need a continuation. If they say our policy doesn't allow it, no, we can't. One, you could take a collaborative approach and say, wonderful, let me learn more about your policy. Can I have a copy of that policy? Because I'd like to know what part of the law you're referencing. You can do that. 2, you can put it in writing. On this date, we were in an IEP meeting. I requested more time. I was told that I could not exceed an hour. I asked for the copy of the policy. It has not yet been given to me. If anything in this letter is incorrect, please notify me. I don't know if you were here for part 1, but I discussed all this a little slower. So feel free to watch that or call me. But you write that letter and you send it to them. You get receipt that they received it. On top of that, if you are ready, you could do a state compliance complaint. Because if they are not allowing you to have a meeting that is according to what you need, then they are in violation of your right to have an IEP meeting where you are an equal participant. So you can already move forward and do a state compliance complaint. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. And again,
Yes, thank you so much. That was very helpful. I appreciate it.
very good. And feel free to give me a call, okay? My info is on the chat. Cindy, I know we're beyond our time, so I'll defer to you.
Once again, I want to thank everyone for coming to our IEP session. If you were not present during part 1 or 2, you can go ahead and view it through YouTube. If you need that information, you can go ahead and let us know so we can put it in the chat. Other than that, I would like you to all send the invitation to anyone that you know that speaks Spanish for next month's meetings. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you to the interpreters.